There is a moment, and if you've lived long enough, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you run out of reasons. Every argument you've built to keep going, every excuse you've rehearsed, every justification you've whispered to yourself at 3 in the morning, just stops working. Most people are terrified of that moment. But what if I told you it's the most sacred thing that will ever happen to you? Stay with me today, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why one of the oldest spiritual texts on earth says that the moment you completely fall apart is the exact moment you're finally ready to be put back together. But first, I need to ask you something. You've been carrying something. Maybe it's a fight with someone you love, someone you once loved, someone who shares your blood. You know the one. The fight where you've rehearsed your side so many times, it plays on a loop, automatically, like a song you can't get out of your head. You've told yourself you're right. You've told yourself they started it. You've told yourself you have no choice. But here's the thing, late at night, when it's just you and the ceiling, you feel it, don't you? That heaviness in your chest. That quiet voice that says, "This isn't who I was supposed to become." You push it down. You build another argument. You find another reason to stay angry, to stay righteous. But the voice doesn't go away. It just gets quieter and heavier and harder to outrun. If that's you right now, don't go anywhere. This story is about you. Neel was 34 years old, a software architect in Pune, respected at work, measured in his words, put together on the outside. But inside, he had been at war, not with the world, with his own younger brother. 8 months ago, their father passed away after a long battle with cancer. And within weeks, something Neel never imagined possible began. He and Kabir, the same Kabir he had once carried on his shoulders through monsoon puddles, the same Kabir he had taught to tie his shoelaces, the same Kabir he had once told, "I'll always have your back, no matter what." That Kabir was now a name on the other side of a legal notice. Their father's property, 2 floors, 1 house, and 2 brothers who could no longer sit in the same room. Neel had his reasons, and they were good ones. He'd been the one who stayed. He'd been the one who drove their father to chemotherapy at 6 in the morning, week after week. He'd held the old man's hand when the machines beeped for the last time and the room went quiet. Kabir had been in Bangalore, building his career, showing up twice a year for Diwali and guilt. So yes, Neel told himself he deserved more. It was only fair. It was a matter of principle. He had a lawyer. He had documents. He had arguments sharp enough to fill a courtroom. But tonight was different. Neel was at the dining table, organizing papers for the next court hearing, when he pulled an old envelope from between the property documents. Inside, a photograph, faded at the edges, creased down the middle. 2 boys, a summer afternoon. Neel, maybe 12 years old, grinning, carrying a 5-year-old Kabir on his shoulders. Both squinting into the sun, both laughing at something long forgotten. And on the back, in their father's careful handwriting, "My 2 pillars." Neel stared at that photograph for a long time, and something he had been holding together with anger and pride and legal paperwork cracked. He didn't cry, not yet. It was worse than that. He just sat there, completely empty. Every reason he had constructed, every justification he had rehearsed, none of it worked anymore. Not tonight. He put the papers down slowly, pushed back from the table, and slid to the floor, his back against the wall. He was done. Not done as in he had a plan, done as in he had nothing left. It was almost midnight when his phone rang. Ratan uncle, his father's oldest friend, the kind of man who smelled like sandalwood and chai and spoke every sentence like it mattered. Couldn't sleep, the old man said, his voice low and unhurried. Kept thinking about your father and about you. Neel was quiet for a long moment, then, barely above a whisper, I don't know what I'm doing anymore, uncle. Ratan uncle didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it sit there between them like something sacred. Then he spoke, slowly, choosing each word the way a sculptor chooses where to strike. Neel, your father told me something once. He said, the worst hell isn't fire, Ratan. The worst hell is watching your sons become strangers and knowing they did it to themselves. You know what you're doing. You've known for weeks. You're not fighting for a house, beta. You're fighting because stopping feels like losing. But tell me, what exactly are you winning? Neel's breath caught in his throat. Ratan uncle continued, gently but without mercy. You've made every argument, run through every reason, and you're still sitting on the floor at midnight, miserable. That emptiness you feel right now, that's not weakness, Neel. That is the most honest you've been in 8 months. When a man runs out of excuses, when he finally drops every weapon he's been swinging, that is not the end. That is the beginning, the only real beginning there is. But what do I do? Neel whispered. Nothing, not yet. Right now, you just stop. Stop fighting, stop arguing, stop building walls around yourself. Just sit with this feeling. Because this exact breaking point, this is where everything that matters starts. Now hear the original Sanskrit. These are the final 3 verses of the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the moment when Arjuna, the greatest warrior of his age, speaks his last desperate arguments and then collapses under the full weight of his grief. Listen. Utsanna kuladharmanam manushyanam janardhan narke niyatam vaso bhavatityanu ahobat mahat papam kartum vyavasita vayam yadrajya sukhalobhen hantum swajana mudyata. Sanjay Uvach. Eva Muktvarjuna Sankhe Rathopasth Upavishat Visrijya Sasharam Chapam Shoka Samvidna Manasa. Here is what these sacred words mean. Arjuna cries out, O Janardhana, O Krishna, we have heard that those who destroy the sacred bonds of family are condemned to dwell in suffering forever. Then he says, Alas, what a terrible sin we have resolved to commit. Driven by nothing more than greed for kingdom and pleasure, we stand prepared to slaughter our own people. And then Sanjaya, the narrator of the Gita, speaks what may be the most haunting line in all of scripture. He says, having spoken thus on the battlefield, Arjuna cast aside his bow and arrows and sank down upon the seat of his chariot, his mind overwhelmed with grief. He didn't find an answer. He didn't solve the problem. He simply stopped. He dropped his weapon. He sat down. And in that total collapse, in that complete surrender of every argument, every identity, every plan, he created the one thing he could not create while fighting: space. Space for something greater to enter. Because it is only after this moment, only in the next chapter, that Krishna finally begins to speak. The teaching doesn't begin when Arjuna is strong. The teaching begins when Arjuna is shattered. Picture the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the largest army ever assembled, stretched across that plain like a living ocean. And at its center, in a golden chariot, stood Arjuna, the warrior who had never been defeated, the archer whose name was spoken with awe from kingdom to kingdom. But across that field stood his own blood, his grandfather, Bhishma, who had held him as a child, his teacher, Drona, who had placed the very first bow in his small hands, his cousins, with whom he had once played in the gardens of a shared palace. And Arjuna did what any human being would do when asked to destroy what he loves. He broke. He made argument after argument. He spoke of dharma, of sin, of hell, of the destruction of family itself. But he wasn't trying to convince Krishna. He was trying to convince himself. And when every argument was spent, when every word had been spoken, and none of it had eased the anguish, he did the only honest thing left. He dropped his bow, he sat down, and he surrendered. Not to Krishna, not to the enemy, to the truth that he could not carry this alone. Neel, sitting on his floor at midnight, his papers scattered, his anger exhausted, his reasons finally used up, was exactly where Arjuna was, not at the end of his story, at the very beginning. Neel didn't call his lawyer the next morning. He didn't call Kabir either. Not yet. For 3 days, he did something he hadn't done in 8 months. Nothing. He sat with the emptiness. He let the silence exist without trying to fill it. He stopped rehearsing arguments in the shower. He stopped building his case over morning coffee. He just stopped. On the 4th day, he picked up the phone. His hands were trembling. He called Kabir, not to negotiate, not to argue, not to win, just to say 5 words he hadn't been able to speak in almost a year. I miss you, little brother. Silence on the other end, a long, unbearable silence. And then, a sound Neel hadn't heard in so long, he'd almost forgotten what it was. Kabir, crying. Not angry crying, not frustrated crying, the other kind, the kind that only comes when something frozen finally begins to thaw. They talked for 2 hours that night. Nothing was resolved. The property dispute wasn't settled. The lawyers hadn't been called off. The hurt on both sides hadn't been erased. But something had shifted, something deep under the surface, like the first hairline crack in frozen ground when spring finally, quietly decides to arrive. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in 8 months, someone had put down their weapon. And that was enough to begin. Now let me ask you, are you where Neel was, where Arjuna was? Every night you rehearse arguments in your head against someone who isn't even in the room. You've convinced everyone around you that you're handling it, but you haven't felt like yourself in months. There's a relationship you keep fighting to win, even though you can feel yourself disappearing inside it. Lately, you're not even angry anymore, you're just tired, and somehow that terrifies you more than the anger ever did. If any of that landed, these verses were waiting for you today. Here is your Gita journal question for today. What is the one fight in your life where you've run out of arguments, but you're still holding on? What would it look like to simply put the bow down? Write it in the comments. You don't have to explain, you don't have to justify, just name it. Sometimes that's all it takes. And remember this, Arjuna didn't become the hero of the Gita by winning the argument. He became the hero by finally falling apart. Maybe it's your turn.